Okay, so welcome to this video on global variables part 3 in this series about the Moodle Formulas question type. Okay, so what else can you do with global variables? Well, you can build something that in computer terms we call an array, but Moodle Formulas question type for some reason calls it a list. So I guess we'll use those terms interchangeably occasionally throughout these videos. But let's suppose that you want to construct an array. Well, what is an array? Well, an array should be thought of as a whole bunch of data that's comma separated, but all really part of one component. So for example, you might have the strings red, green, and yellow, and those three strings might come together to form one component or one array. So rather than just saying the string red, the string green, the string yellow, you can actually take those three strings and build one component that we call an array. Now, the important thing to note about arrays is that arrays have index values or addresses in the array. So, for example, in the array red, green, and yellow, red being the first item has an address or an index of 0. Green being the second item in the array has an address or index of 1, etc. So the really important thing to take note on is that your first item in an array is your 0th item. Okay, so what do you do with these arrays? Well, you can use an array to strategically remove an item to display it as part of question text or as part of your answer. A great example is maybe you have 30 students in your class and you want to have 30 completely different questions for each of those students, potentially. Well, you can use an array with 30 different indices or 30 items in your array and then have it pull one of those items for each of your students. Okay, so let's find out how to use arrays and what they look like as we're building them. Okay, so we'll create a new question. Formulas question type. Let's name our question. So we'll call this question delete dash list dash array. Under the variable section, we'll leave random variables alone for the moment. Let's construct a global variable that's an array. And we'll call it myLetterArray is equal to the array given by the single letters or the single strings A, B, C, D, E, and F. So there's my array. What I'm going to do now is pull an item from that array and assign that to a global variable. So I'll call that global variable selectLetter. And again, what selectLetter is going to do is go into my array. So that's going to be myLetterArray. And maybe let's have it pull the item with an index of 2. There we go. So what this is going to do is it's going to search inside of myLetterArray. And it's going to pull the item that's in the second position. So remember now, this is our 0th position, this is our first position, and this is our second position. So essentially, this is going to pull the letter C and assign that to be the selectLetter global variable. Okay, so there we go. Now, another thing that maybe we can do is we can also utilize the array within a function itself. And we'll show you how to do that. So let's suppose for a moment that what we're going to do is ask a question that asks students to determine the letter of the alphabet that's been selected. So in this case, that's selecting the letter C. I'm hoping students are going to say, hey, that's the third letter in the alphabet. So I'll create another global variable here. And so notice we can define the array while we're using the array itself. So if we say select answer is given by 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, we have this array of numbers that are comma separated, the array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're asking it to pull the item in the index or address of 2 in this case. So what is happening here is we're saying there's our 0th index, our first index, and our second index. So what will happen here is it's pulling the index of 2, so this is constantly going to be equal to that item there, 3. So essentially what we have right now is the top part that's pulling the letter out, and that letter is going to be C, and this bottom part that's saying 3. Okay, so it's matching up really nicely. We're going to basically ask students what letter of the alphabet is the letter C, and they're going to respond with the number 3. Let's have a look at the question text. So in the question text, we're going to have what number letter of the alphabet is C. And then we'll have a placeholder for our answer. Okay, so now let's go ahead and build our answer. So we'll go down to the bottom now. And so for our answer, what we need here is we need select answer. And what we want is absolute error. There we go. For our placeholder, we of course want part 1. And away we go. Save those changes. All is good. We'll preview. What number letter of the alphabet is C? The student will answer 3, and it's working. Excellent. So now let's suppose you want to sort of randomize this so not everybody's being asked about the letter C. So what we're going to do now is we're going to introduce a random variable, and the random variable is going to pick some random letter from this array. So I'm going to say selector is given by some number between 0 and 5 in steps of 1. So what this selector essentially I'm going to do is use it to pick either the 0th item, the first item, the second, the third, the fourth, or the fifth. I'm going to utilize this selector to choose which version of the array I want. So instead of always pulling the second index, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the selector to pull whatever it is out of the array. And of course, in my answer, I want it to be the same. I want it to match up. So I'm going to use that same selector again in my answer. That small change, let's see what happens. We'll save those changes, preview. What number letter from the alphabet is the letter B? Okay, so that's the second letter in the alphabet, and it's working. And there we go. We're starting to gain a better sense now as to how we can utilize an array. Okay, so now let's have a look at some more. And let's suppose you have an array and you want to add more items to that array. So let's suppose here, for example, we want to add more items to my letter array. So we can do that in our global variables using the function concatenation. And we can say my letter array is equal to the concatenation of my letter array and the array G, H, and I. So two things really I want you to pay attention to here. First is that we've declared a variable called myLetterArray that we've utilized previously. So what's going to essentially happen is it's not going to affect areas where we've used the first iteration of that declaration, like in our second line here. But what will happen is because we're redefining the myLetterArray, from this point moving forward in our algorithm, it's going to take upon the most recent declaration of the variable. So it's an overwrite, basically, from this point moving forward. So what I've done is I've taken my initial array, the A through F, and I've concatenated it with the array G through I, giving me that full 9-letter array now. Excellent. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a letter and then select an answer from that new array. So I'll go global variables, select a letter, my letter array, and then utilize a new selector for that. And then select an answer and use the full 9-letter array and select an answer from that. Okay, so I need to have a new selector in my random variables, and I've already kind of named that selector 2. And that, of course, is going to be either the 6th item, the 7th item, or the 8th item. And remember, these are addresses, not actual items in the array. The 6th address, the 7th address, or the 8th address. So essentially, I'm narrowing this down to say that I'm going to select, even though I'm feeding in the whole array, I'm only going to select either the 6th, the 7th, or the 8th item in that new array. And even though here I'm feeding in that whole array, I'm only again going to select the 6th, the 7th, or the 8th item from those answers. And there we go. Now we go down to our question text, and in our question text, we're going to utilize some of this. So our question text, what number letter of the alphabet is select letter 2? And of course, now I'll have a new part for that. So for that answer, it's going to be select ans 2. So I'll go to part 1, get a new answer box. Part 2 now, we're going to have the answer of select ans2. And of course, I want absolute error. And I want to name my part 2. There we go. We'll save it. And let's preview. It's now asking us what number letter of the alphabet is B, and we can fill in the correct responses, and we can see that this is nicely working. So that's essentially how you can now take an array and add more items to the array at a later point in time. Okay, so let's keep going with this. Find out maybe some more stuff that we can do with it. So under our variables here, what I'm going to do is add in a random variable, and this random variable is going to be called mynum, and they're going to present the student with either the number 2, the number 3, or the number 5. And what we're going to do here is, let's suppose we want to ask some students to square the number that they're given. Of course, students could be given any one of 3 different numbers. Or we'll ask students to maybe cube the number that they're given, either given the number 2, 3, or 5. So completely different question for both students with completely different context. So in order to do this, what I need is some global variables that first maybe select the context for the student. So the text for student, I want the student to square the number, or I want the student to cube the number. So I need different context. So in order to do that, I'm going to build my global variable, and it's going to be called text select. I'm either going to ask them to square the number or cube the number, and then utilize some selector to do that. Secondly, I'm going to have them select the answer that matches up with it, and the answer is either going to be to square the number, here's the square, or cube the number and cube. So you can see how we're now able to match up context in a question with an actual answer. Obviously here I need a new selector. So my selector up top here is going to now be select mark. And that's going to be given by either the 0th item in the array or the first item in the array. And there we go. Okay, so what's going to happen? Well, if select mark produces, say, 0, then the text will read square the number, and the answer will, of course, produce mynum squared. If the selector pulls 1 as the index, then it's going to ask the students to cube the number and then produce an answer that they cube the number. Okay, so we keep going down with this. And into part 3 for our question text. Well, we first say text select and then provide them with the number and then ask for the answer down below. So again, our question text will fill itself in here based upon what got selected there from the global variable. And mynum, of course, will be pulled from the random variable. And our answer box goes down below. Okay, so we go to part 2 now. For part 2, we need to blank for more parts. There we go. For part 3, we need to define our answer. Our answer is just going to be answer 3, absolute error equals to 0, and our placeholder, of course, is just part 3. So let's see what happens. And save changes. And preview. And we're asked what number letter of the alphabet is E, what number letter of the alphabet is G, and square the number. We fill in our answers, and we can see that it's nicely working. And so there's a nice comprehensive review on how to use arrays within global variables of the Moodle Formulas question type. And thanks for watching this third part of global variables as part of the Moodle Formulas question type series.